Metemtechnosis, the second entry in the Design Abstracts Technotheism trilogy. This album has problems. This album has a lot of problems, and there's a wide variety of reasons why I don't like it. Where to begin? The production was rushed as a result. There are mix problems. The mastering is not what it could be, but there's some really obvious, like the difference between the kick levels in the songs are like apparent. Rough. Not good. Not like a edgy, cool production decision. Right. Just a mistake. Just a mistake. This is the first Design Abstract album that we're going to talk about, again, going in reverse chronological order, that suffered genre bipolarism. Not bipolarism, genre schizophrenia. It's all over the place, right? Digital Dawn has a very distinct sound, like the opener of the album, which Born of Machines, completely different thing. As we go along, like Hybrid Awakening is kind of, I think, the most plain Design Abstract sort of sound. Then you've got Organic Data Fusion, which sounds completely different. Not necessarily not the Design Abstract, but it was a sound that we were going to do and didn't end up doing. We'll skip Aberration Omega for the time. Sentinels. What the hell was Sentinels? What was that genre? And even, I haven't talked up until this point about interludes. I kind of skip intros and interludes when talking about this stuff because they are meant to just be a break. I think if they express something musically, that's great, but their job is to just sort of act as like space, downtime. They don't need to be groundbreaking. But this one in particular, I feel like it was ruined. I think it had what was it, like uprising or whatever? Upheaval. I feel like it had the potential to be greater than it was. And Decryptor is great, obviously. That song holds up. But man, you have to really struggle to get there. Where do I even dive in? The mix problems, the genre problems. I mean, I guess that's as much as I can really say about that. It's just different influences used poorly. There wasn't a unifying sound to it, and I think that was a negative creative decision. I don't think it works in its favor at all. And as much as I love Digital Dawn, I think it was not a very put together sound in the grand scheme of the album. We could have gone that direction, but in the context of the other songs, it is odd. It sounds out of place. Like Decryptor is the bass line, and Hybrid Awakening isn't that far off. And while I loved Born of Machines at the time, and I would be happy just writing songs that were just like that, it's basically just straight Gothenburg Melodeath with like a little bit of orchestra flavor, like that's fine. I'd be happy to do that, but none of the other songs sound like that. And that's a problem. And the reason is because Matt was on this album and he was the one who wrote that song, because at the time I was like, I want the Design Abstract to sound like Gothenburg Melodeath, just with orchestra. I want all the riffs to be Gothenburg Melodeath with a little bit of like chunkier death metal. And Logan is like, I don't know what that is or what that means, and I don't listen to those bands. And so I knew Matt did. So we got him on board with the idea of he will add that sort of Gothenburg Melodeath sound to the band. And he wrote that song ages ago, and I mean, it turned out fucking great. Again, it doesn't really fit the album at the time, but that was the only song he ended up writing for that album. He ended up doing basically just like the leads and solos on this album. So the rest of the songs on it were Logan ideas that I just completely cut up and redid over and over again. I wrote a couple of the riffs in Digital Dawn, all the stupid ones I wrote. I'm trying to think of who wrote Decryptor. I think Decryptor was all Logan's riffs, like heavily rearranged, of course. But I think at the core of it, that was all his stuff. I just forget who wrote the breakdown, but it was probably him. It's good. It's a good breakdown, so it was probably him. Yeah. So there were inconsistencies because of that. I think Organic Data Fusion, maybe Sentinels, and then a whole bunch of songs that we ended up cutting from the album, they could have been their own sound. This more romantic, flowy, mid-tempo, super dense, kind of proggy thing that is not the design abstract. Like, it just isn't. I think at the time, a lot of some criticism that we got of technotheism was that it like wasn't melodic, which is funny because there's way more notes going on than anything else. But you know, they meant it's not accessible. It's not, it doesn't have feeling to it. And so we're like, okay, let's do some shit with feel. And like, sure, but that's not really the sound of the band. The lead work that Matt did definitely did bring that sort of organic feel to it, and thematically at the time that the story takes place, that natural organic feel does really work. My main problem is that some of the parts of the songs, it was just too much. And that, you know, mileage may vary on that take. Some people would be like, no, all of the guitar work is fine. But for me, I felt it took away some of the nuance that would have otherwise been there, particularly on Decryptor. Decryptor was one of the most harmonically complicated things I've ever written in my entire life. And like the bridge specifically. The bridge in that does music theory things that I have never done and probably will not ever do again. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do them again, just in terms of harmony and overall composition. I literally busted out music theory textbooks for that song. And I feel like the solos over it, they don't add to it. They're just there because they're there. They do actively take away from what it could have been. And that happens some parts throughout the album. I think a lot of it is made better with these lead guitars that you can really grip onto. You have a focal point, right? That you don't have in the other Design Abstract releases. If you compare this to basically anything else by the Design Abstract, there's never been such a clear focal point of here's what your ear wants to hear. And his writing is definitely, I don't want to say hooky necessarily, but it's compelling. His lead work takes the music and makes it digestible in a way that the band had never been like before. And a lot of spots on this album would have been completely bland without it, but some spots on this album I think were completely oversaturated by it as well. And the bridge of Decryptor is the one that I sorely regret, because I don't give a shit if you ruin Data Fusion Attack, Deja Shield, Organic Data Fusion. That wasn't a joke that time. I actually did fuck that up. I don't care if you ruin Organic Data Fusion. I don't think he did. I don't really remember. But I don't care. Same with Sentinels. I don't think there are leads in Sentinels. Sentinels came pre-ruined, you know? It's just not a good fit for the album. Digital Dawn is whatever. You know? So there was ups and downs to that sort of writing, to have Matt taking this position of putting guitar in a place where overwhelmingly in the history of this band, guitar had not been. We're not a lead heavy band at all. Yeah, there's ups and downs to that, and there's spots that I wish I had edited better, is basically what that comes down to. I can say the same thing, you know, memorability on songs is mixed. The thing that personally I am bothered by is, you know, we did Metropolis 2, which is fine, way back before this was even a band, when this was like we're talking over a decade ago, okay? I had plans for what would be the first design album. And there was Metropolis Part 1 and Part 2. It was the most plain kiddo discovers dystopia for the first time. So there was a song about above the surface, right, where everything is shiny, neon lights, pretty, and then below the surface, the underclass, the people who are, oppressed and fighting for survival. Literally the most plain dystopia you can think of. And Metropolis 1 was the former. It's even in the music video. Big ass, pretty city, right? And Metropolis 2 was going to be the underbelly, the underworld. And that intro I wrote before everything. That intro is older than Emanate, okay? And so I think the reason people like that song is just because that intro, which to me is cheating. That intro is like years and years old. So it's like, I don't know. I don't think that people like it on the musical merit of the rest of the song. If they do, that's great. I don't think it was a particularly good song. I think it was fun. We had fun making it, which is a point against it as far as I'm concerned. I don't like when we have fun making things. Not for this anyway. So nobody knows that, right? And nobody cares. And that intro was really, really good, but that's still in my brain. It's like I wrote that so long ago that like it's not related to this album. And I feel like it might have elevated that song above what it could have been, but I judge that song excluding that intro because that intro has been around as long as time. That intro predates Emanate. So yeah, fun little thing there. Production wise, I think this is where it starts getting rough. This is the point, working backwards, where the vocals to me are noticeably worse. The vocal tone is worse. There is a lack of conviction and presence in the clean vocals, even if musically they got way flashier compared to older stuff. They're higher and the layers are tighter and they have more presence relative to other releases. But comparing the vocals on Metemtechnosis to newer stuff, like there's no comparison. They are way worse. They're weaker. The mastering isn't quite as bad as I had expected, honestly. You can just assume a steady decline as we get further back. I know mastering ruined technotheism. It's not quite as bad as I thought. We have not talked about Aberration Omega yet. And the thing with that song, I think the reason I don't like it is that same thing. It's just the vocal tone isn't there. I think that song in concept is basically perfect. I described to Logan what I wanted and he came up with something absolutely amazing. All of the parts work together really well, but I think the vocals bring it down when it's mostly clean vocals. And I think those vocals hold it back. And again, this is from my perspective. I'm the one listening to my own voice and being like, this is at a point where it noticeably could be better. Maybe if other people who aren't me couldn't articulate why it could be better, but I could, and I could do it better now, which holds it back for me. But all other things considered, like at the time, it was the very best we were capable of. I think it's an underrated song. It's an underrated song on an album that I don't think is good. So what can you do about that? I include it with like Decryptor and I guess cerebral hybridization, hybrid awakening as like those are the real design abstract songs on this lacking design abstract album. I think it's criminal to like this album more than Transhuman Ascendant, and I don't think Transhuman Ascendant is perfect, but I think Transhuman Ascendant is a more appropriate follow-up to Technotheism. I think this was a poor follow-up to Technotheism. At the time, we didn't know what people liked about it. We didn't know what we liked about it. And I was losing confidence in my guitar writing, which is why I basically didn't touch guitar on it. And I think these are all faults. These are all things that make it bad. My kind of recurring test on this little series is if I skip songs when I listen to it. And yes, I skip the majority of songs when I listen to this. I will tolerate... You gotta listen to either Digital Dawn or Born of Machines separately because they don't work back to back. You listen to one or the other, and then you go to Hybrid Awakening, skip Organic Beta Fusion, skip Metropolis 2, personally. I don't like that song. I don't think it's good. I've heard that intro 8 million times, and then the rest of the song I don't think is compelling or good musically. Aberration Omega you listen to, obviously. Interlude skip, Sentinels hard skip, delete it from your library. And then Decryptor's amazing. Listen to that 3 times over. But like, that's bad. That's a lot of skips. That's horrible album planning. And I genuinely don't think that anyone should like sit through this entire album and be like, well, that was good and made sense. Like, it's just not true. It's just not true. So yeah, there's a lot wrong with this, and there's a couple highlights, but it's mostly bad. And I know people were impressed at the time that we could shit out albums once a year, every year, but like, it shows. Looking back, it shows. Maybe it's the best we could have done at the time, but not writing wise. Writing wise, I know we could have done better because we made Technotheism before this, and we made those Ethereal Void albums during this. So there's really no excuse other than I just wanted it out. I just wanted it done, and that's stupid, and I'm regretting that. Making this series has made me regret pushing those deadlines and rushing everything so hard because I knew I could do better, because the better result didn't end up being better. I'm not gonna shit on it for like my vocal tone could have been better. Yes, it's been years now. I was doing the very best that I could. I practiced Aberration Omega for weeks. And the fact that it doesn't sound like how I do now, I'm not going to blame myself for that. But having Sentinels on there and having these songs where the genres didn't make any sort of sense, like not backburnering either Born of Machines or Digital Dawn and having them back to back, that's not excusable. I knew what genres were back then too, you know? So it kind of hurts to look back and be like, this is worse than I thought it was at the time. And I knew it was rushed at the time, but I still thought that I would still like it. I don't know. It's tough to explain, but God, hopefully I have learned my goddamn lesson. On our scale of 10 being a perfect album and 1 or 0 being it's trash and if you like it, I'll kill you, we're going to put this at like a 5, a 4.5, or a 5. There's so much wrong with this. There's so much wrong with it, and I don't think it's a learning experience. It was as good as we can do at the time. It only covers half of it. If you excuse, like, if I'm rating this on what it could have been at the time of release, it's still like a 6.5. Like, it's just, fuck, man. Like, oh, there's so much. I genuinely have so many regrets about this album. And like, if you like it, that's awesome. That's great, because you're not me, right? And you don't have to hear your own voice listening to it. Like, and know your own creative decisions and your own behind the scenes, right? That's why I'm making this, because you don't know it, but I do. And I know that I was rushing the deadline like crazy, and there's parts where Matt threw a whole bunch of blah, blah, blah over shit, and I was like, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to say anything because I know we worked really hard on it, and like, I should have just cut it. I should have cut it because now I regret it, and I'm not just going to go back and re-release it without it, because that's like a super cunt dick move. But it's like, oh no, it just needs to get done. It just needs to get done, and I don't really care that much, and whatever. And it's like, well, I care now, and it is the way that it is, and that sucks that I have to live with that. I can forgive the vocal performance not being as good as I can do now, but I can't forgive the writing decisions that made no sense then or now. It's kind of rough. Yeah.